concept of the blind tasting for today is, how do you blind taste stages of maturation? So we've mixed up the first 6 wines, and so what we're going to do is just talk quickly about how do you approach from a blind tasting, from the MW perspective, when I'm blind tasting, how do I assess maturation? If it's too young, youthful, what does it show in the glass? These are kind of general things. So too young, youthful, fruit-driven, vivacious, yet not yet complex, oaken tannins seem to stand out and are not yet integrated. All right, closed or dumb phase. I've heard both terms, we've used both terms.
Or shut down.
Shut down would be another way to say it, thank you. So you lose aromas without gaining bouquet.
What does that mean?
That means it's muted. You're not getting, it doesn't have the evolution of the bottle bouquet yet, but it also isn't showing fruit-driven, oaky flavors. It's kind of like, and Lynn said, shut down, dumb, or closed. And this is an interesting period. I mean, a few months to years, I think it really truly varies on the wine. I mean, you hear a lot of wines described as kind of in their teenage years where they're going through some growth changes, and that's kind of what we're referring to. Well, awkwardness, yeah. Peak, 15 to 40 years. It's hard again to specify because vintages, quality, it all varies. So what is that? How can we define that when a wine's at peak? The bouquet is fully developed without decay. Astringency is receded.
What do you mean fully without decay?
So it's opened. The complexities have developed, but yet it's not showing the souring characteristics, the complete deadening of fruit. So there's life there. It's open without decay. Because the decaying process, right, the flavors tire and stale, essentially. So you've got basically maximum potential that wine's going to get from an aromatic perspective. And a complexity perspective, too. Integrated mouthfeel. This is also very important, especially blind tasting and trying to discern, where is this wine at? And it can be misleading. It's very difficult to blind taste older wines from different vintages because of all the compounding variables. There's so many factors that affect how a wine ages, and it's literally, quote from several resources. I wrote it down. I was like, this is great. That the changes from secondary to tertiary flavors, and we'll talk about that in just a second, change by a pathway not yet understood into what is termed bottle bouquet. They do not understand the science of wine evolution, period. They, as in the foremost chemist and wine professionals, still have not pinpointed the complexities of how wine ages and why. So it makes it, on our end, when you're blind, you know what I mean? It's hard to predict because of all the variables, which we could talk about in just a sec, because that's kind of interesting. So too old or past peak, so the tiring of flavors, the deadening of flavors, that's not a good place to be. And sometimes that drinking window is short, and the past peak comes quickly. It's really hard to predict. And then acidity as a result of all the chemical changes. Acidity is perceived to dominate because you've lost fruit. The fruit, especially ripe fruit, can add texture or perception of texture on the palate to balance the structural components, your acid and your tannins. So when you've got soft tannins and now you've got no fruit characteristics, what's left in the evolution in an old wine that's past peak is literally the sour acid characteristics. I'm sure you guys all can relate to this, right? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Part of the exercise is assessing, where are we at? Is this wine too youthful? Is this in a weird phase? Are we at peak, or is this past peak? And this is kind of what I've created to determine how do we define that. Because we all may come from our own perspectives, but how do we kind of formalize that? So let's keep that in mind as we blind taste in just a moment here. So what is the systematic approach to assessing the state of maturation? The intensity of the color, let's connect this to information that's useful. Let's connect these to maturation. What can the color intensity tell you about the maturation state of a wine. Yeah, brick or red or garnet indicates that scene's age. So visually, you can quickly look through these wines, but that's not always 100% accurate because every vintage is different, right? And they age differently. So, but it does indicate there is some evolution happening here. How about the intensity itself? Yeah, in the intensity, right? If it's still fully intact, you have very little rim variation where the bowl hits the, when you turn your glass on the side over white and you look straight down, the center there is your bowl. As you move your eye to the rim, is there a change, a dramatic change in color, tone, right? Does it lose color, go from pale to deep, notably? Rim variation is a huge indicator of, a potential indicator of how long it's been aged. But for sure, a good visual cue. So the color intensity, also color, the actual color could relate to the grapes used, right? Like Cabernet Sauvignon, well, Merlots as well in Bordeaux, but the actual specific colors can relate to extraction techniques, winemaking, the grape variety chose, so there's a lot of information you can garner from there. And rim variation we just talked about, and then of course sedimentation. What is sedimentation? Like literally, what is it? The precipitation of tannins, anthocyanins, basically bond together as a wine ages, and as it bonds together molecularly, it becomes really big and heavy and quite literally falls out of solution. So it's this bonding process of different molecules, anthocyanins, the color, and polyphenolics, tannins, and basically you see this anthocyanin phenolic combination of color and tannin, and that's why you lose tannin and color. And that is a reflection, and you can see that in the sedimentation of the wine. But that's literally what has happened from a chemical perspective. Where am I at with the aging process? I think this is really useful. Youthful primary and secondary flavors is a youthful wine. You're going to find mainly fruit, floral characteristics, and then your winemaking or secondary characteristics is the term for oak and winemaking processes. So your spicy notes, your nutty notes, your chocolate, spices like baking spices, espresso, vanilla, nutmeg, if it's a white ginger, etc. So chocolate, almond, walnuts, espresso, those sort of flavor characteristics are from the winemaking, specifically oak. So in its youth, you're going to be hovering between primary, secondary. As the wine evolves, it's going to shift to secondary, tertiary. And that's where, you know, who knows when that moment's going to happen and how well it's going to go. And then finally, you're shifting from tertiary to bottle bouquet, where it's really, you're here when it's at peak. But this is a good sign that the wine is probably at least 10 years old to 15 years old, is you're picking up a lot of tertiary notes. And you'll find that, as you know, in most older Bordeaux wines. And then the pinnacle being bottle bouquet, which you try and research, nobody's got a definition. So the definition is complex, difficult to describe aromas. Okay? No, literally, there is no definition for bottle bouquet. It literally is complexity. It's these flavors that are so interesting, but very hard to define. Yes, so again, keeping this in mind, on the palate, what happens to our tannins? How integrated are the tannins? Are they soft at this point? Or are they still young and astringent and chewy? So this is like firm, chewy, astringent, grippy versus velvety, plush, soft, fine grain. Where are the tannins at relates to how old the wine is. So in its youth, you're going to generally find more chewiness, grip, and as it evolves and shifts, you're going to find more of a softer texture. Now, this again, looking at vintages, we may have some confusion here when we get to tasting in just a second, because sometimes a younger vintage versus an older vintage, the older vintage shows more chewy astringentness, and it never evolves, right? So you're tasting, oh God, this still has a lot of tannins, and it's 30 years old. Sometimes those are hard vintages where the tannins truly never evolved, and that is a problem. And there are some vintages here that have that problem, so hopefully we can figure it out when we get there. So flavor, integration, concentration, complexity. So what is dominant here? Is it primary, secondary, tertiary? Has all the fruit dried up, leaving acid, possible tannin if it's a hard, cold vintage or a difficult vintage. Also helps you kind of determine where are we at in the evolution or the maturation state of the wine. How's the acidity? Is it balanced? Is it like one of the wines here had such beautiful freshness, yet had bottle bouquet and still had fruit characteristics? To me, that was a really sweet spot. I'm not going to reveal which one, but there is a favorite in these first 6 that I found that really, like, to me, shows that this wine is in a good place and evolving well for my palate. Now, everyone is slightly different, right? You may not agree with that. Yeah?
Question. If the tannins remain predominant after 30 years, for example, is that indicative of a low quality wine?
Well, it just depends, right? What are the other components? Is it just tannins, but yet there's still a lot of flavor concentration? Or is it just tannins and all you're getting is this angular sour component? So that's the real question, because there are great wines that are 30 years old, still with massive tannins, but also with the other components to balance that. So that's where the consideration of balance is very important when you're assessing how is this wine evolving. Does that make sense? And then body, right? Is it thin, watery, angular? Kind of relates to, you know, acidity, body, alcohol. These are all together relating to balance. I try to break them out just to give you guys some terms to play with. So an example of something that's evolving, a youthful evolving wine would show ruby color with garnet highlights, moderate rim variation, primary fruit notes combined with integrated secondary notes, cedar, allspice, and tertiary, right? It's evolving, so it's showing all categories. Highly extracted plush mouthfeel with high levels of fine-grained tannins and high alcohol points to a wine that's drinking well now due to its forward flavors and bouquet, but will age another 6 to 8 years due to high-level complexity and opulence. This is one of my Master of Wine notes. This is the sort of stuff they expect you to write on the exam. So this is kind of an example, and I thought it kind of tied everything together that we've talked about. How do you describe an evolving wine? How do you describe a wine in relation to its state of maturation using evidence, right? And that's the idea here, is the evidence, the color evidence, the rim variation evidence, the flavor characteristics, primary, secondary, tertiary evidence. How does the mouthfeel evidence? What about the tannins, alcohol? So you're using your observations from the glass to put your argument together of what state you think this maturation of this wine could be. All right, so without further ado, put the first 6 wines in order from oldest to youngest and comment on their state of maturation using what we just talked about. And when you show your answers, I want you to defend it with evidence in the glass. Talk about the flavors, talk about the tannins, talk about the texture. Okay, who feels confident that they have them in more or less the pretty close to correct answers? Okay, so go ahead.
I was focused on color, and then I tried to back it up with nose, and
Good.
then I went into taste.
Okay.
So really the emphasis was on color, and I tried to study them closely. And you just never know with these things, but here, do I say the numbers? Yeah.
Go for it.
So number 1, I believe, is the 1990. And number 2 is 1975. Number 3, 1996. Number 4, 1982. Number 5 and 6 are the 1998s. The first one being Saint Domingue, the second one being Palate.
Interesting.
It's a try.
I only agree with one of your choices.
So apart from color, does anyone have we'll do this. He did an argument for color. Who wants to do an argument for wines 1 through 6 based on the aromatics? Okay, so we're moving to palate. Good. So you went 75 for the nose on number 1. The palate, you said for 75 you thought was also number 1.
It's all the tertiary aromas.
Good. Okay.
I thought number 4 was the 75, because I got a lot more mushroom and.
Same here. I thought 4 was 75. Yeah.
Okay. And why did you think 4 was the 75?
75 was kind of an odd year, and there were a lot of wines that never really came together.
Okay.
This one, I think, has. Actually, it's one of the better 75s that I've had.
Do you want me to state the answer first and then tell you what I think?
Yes.
Yes.
Number 1 glass is the 1990. Very good.
Yes.
Very good. That is very good. And
Yep, the Prieure-Lichine. I wrote down shows primary, secondary, and tertiary fruits, flavors. So it shows there's still fruit, there's still winemaking, but definitely shows a lot of tertiary notes. Plush, it's very open, there's a presence, some bottle bouquet, obviously. On the palate, I wrote plush texture, tannin-wise. They were pretty soft at this point. But the acidity was nice and juicy and fresh. So I felt the evolution of this wine was pretty good. However, compared with the other wines that are older, you go, okay, well, I don't know how well that aged because there's some older wines here that are even more fresh than this one. And in a blind, I can see why people called it 75 because the tannins have kind of fallen out. And, you know, but it did have it still had life to it, but it was not the most, anyway, it still had life. So number 2 was the 1982. No? Good job.
That was my favorite wine.
Me too. Me too. It was delicious. To me, it was the favorite one on the palate. It still had so much life and juiciness. Like the acidity was there, but there was also fruit characteristic. So it wasn't just sour. Like it really was a lively structure. The color I think looking at these wines, a few of them look like 1 and 4 almost look identical. So I can understand why people put number 1 as 75. Okay, number 3, Chateau Palmer. Now, what about those tannins? That had a powerful tannin structure. And the vintage 96 was in fact known for its powerful tannin structure. And so this was aligned with that assessment. And it didn't have the softness and the flesh of a couple of the other wines with the fruit aspect. Like you can feel it was a structured vintage. It really was, a mouthful. Number 4 was your 1975. Good job. And I think your assessment was spot on. Nice. And I wrote, this is an example of a wine to me that's peak to slightly going, it's going this way. It's still good, and to his point, I think it's showing okay, but it's definitely on the decline. And there's still some tannins that I felt were unresolved. So I felt like, for me, considering the age, you could still feel this, like, compared with 90, for example, where the tannins were so evolved. Like the 75 still had some chewiness, and I was thinking, okay, it's still got power. Is this going to be one of those wines where it dies off and you're left with just tannins that never resolve? And that kind of, to me, this example was in my mind, I'm like, I don't think these tannins will ever resolve. Because they're still quite, to me, marked considering compared with the others, yeah.
So these are the 2 wines that I struggled with most because 82.
Which numbers?
Number 2 and number 4.
2 and 4?
Because I wasn't sure which way to go,
Yeah.
75 or 82. But as I look at them again, the tone and hue, just from color, you've got more rust in the 82.
When I'm blind tasting, I do not put most of my emphasis on color because it's not, the most accurate assessment is your nose and your palate. That my approach when I'm blinding, I go, okay, all right. Because I know some vintages age faster than others. So going on appearance alone is not a true indicator of the age. Or different qualities. Also, some can brown out faster than others, depending on the quality or the grape variety. Like there's too many compounding variables. Granted, we're in Bordeaux only, but I would suggest moving forward, go nose, palate, then use your color as your supporting evidence. But it shouldn't be where, oh, this color, therefore it's that. That's because you're going to find yourself. It worked for a lot of the wines for you, I'm surprised, but that's not my technique. I put most of my energy on the nose and the palate, especially the palate. All right, moving along, 5 and 6. Number 5 is the 98 Pichon Longueville, and number 6. Oh, the Baron, excuse me. And the number 6 was the Canon. Yes. The Saint-Emilion.
I got those 2 right.
Okay. So what do you guys think of the 98s? I think you can see the vintage. These are still youthful tannic styles. These are not, this is not a fleshy wine. Neither of these, I don't think. Yeah, but I thought to me, number 6 had a little bit more flesh and softness on the palate, but it was also right bank, right? It's Merlot based. And that Pauillac, really right bank, left bank. That's another variable you have to consider when you're blind tasting, right? What is the main grape? Cabernet naturally has more tannins and more acidity than Merlot is more body and textural. And I feel like these two next to each other really show that point, I thought, well. Très bien?
It was so much fun.
Good, good, yay! Yeah.